is on.
Hello and welcome to this webinar on early contractor involvement. I'm Peter Higgins, and together with Matthew Garratt, we're going to explain how to achieve best practice in preparing and procuring an ECI contract and in setting the total of the prices for stage 2. The website, NEC website's got a practice note covering this, and we're going to be following the process in that practice note in describing what happens here. So you can go to the website, download the practice note and get the full details from there. We're going to cover first of all bid document, how to put together bid document, how to bid for the work, how to win work, useful stuff, how to make an assessment of this bid when it comes in, how to deal with a contract award, what you're going to be including in the contract, what is the use of the pricing information and the submissions procedure. And then finally, we'll move to stage 2, what's needed to do that. We'll allow something like 15 or 20 minutes at the end for questions. And please use the question button as we go along to set the questions. We'll pick those up and we can either pick them up as we go along if we find something that's relevant to what we're talking about, or we'll take them all at the end. So let's make a start. Matthew, can you start off by explaining to us, summarising what is an ECI contract?
Okay, thanks, Peter. From my point of view, ECI is a procurement approach to create a contract where the contractor is engaged at an early stage of a project to offer input into the design at an early stage and to jointly develop plans and mitigate risks jointly with the client and the client's team prior to moving to construction. And as you know, NEC4 engineering and construction contract uses secondary option X20 to help clients and users do this. Peter, why do you think clients would make the choice to use ECI? Well,
if you think about it, there's starting off, there's no real restrictions. You can use ECI in any contract. There's nothing that says you can't use it on certain contracts. However, if you've got a particularly complex contract with complex contract requirements, that is where you're going to get the most benefit from it, because you get the added benefit of the contractor's skill in that critical first stage. What it does is ECI really is aimed at delivering value for money for the client, which is, if you like, achieving client's objectives whilst at the same time minimizing overall cost. The way it does this, because it focuses on client's objective right at the very start. The two parties, the client and the contractor, working together in stage 1 to develop a solution for the client's objectives within the budget. And these objectives can be as wide as you like. They're not just money and time and this is the product I want, but they can be other things as well, such as environmental work or whatever. Now, the way that the contract works, it provides a dedicated construction planning stage, construction planning and design stage. During this, the design is developed and to take account of the construction methodology. So instead of having just design and then construction working out how to build it, the design is taking account of construction as well. And by doing this, the methodologies will deal with the construction risk and minimize the construction risk and avoid many of them. So it reduces construction risk. And by doing this, you can get a very more accurate cost estimate of that work. Now, if you want to have a successful ECI contract, there are a number of what you call key success factors you need to bring into account. First factor, client must have the resources to procure and manage this contract. If you haven't got them in-house, you need to bring them in. Employed consultant, advisor who can help you, who's got experience in this. You need the resources to deal with it in the first place. The second factor is all about design strategy. Be very clear who's going to do what design, what the responsibilities are for design, and also make sure you've identified the optimal maturity of design for ECI tender purposes. If you go too late and you lost the benefit of the contractor's input in terms of buildability and construction process, if you go too early, you have a problem with the budget. You can't set a realistic budget if you don't know enough about what you're trying to do. The third factor, of course, relates back to the budget, which says that must be adequate. This means that there must be enough of a project development to be able to say, yes, it's going to cost this amount of money, broadly speaking. And the budget, of course, obviously has to include risk, both the client risk, which is the compensation event allowance, but also contractor's risk. Things will happen which the contractor doesn't get additional compensation for, and therefore those need to be added in as well. Now, the fourth factor is preparation of pricing information. Because the design isn't complete, you can't get a tender price. Therefore, the pricing information has to set out how you're going to reach that price when you get to the stage your design is developed sufficiently to get there. So this is pretty important, and we've got a special session on that Matthew's going to take us to later. But in the meantime, Matthew, can you just explain what is needed in the absence of a tender total? What do we need to have?
Thanks, Peter. As you rightly say, Peter, I've got terrible feedback there. As you rightly say, because the detailed proposals for design are developed during stage one, at tender stage for ECI, a price for the work is not provided. That's something you work up during stage one. So the client does need to find other ways of establishing or determining which is the best value bid that it receives. So the client will make a choice about the commercial information that it asks for from the bidders, and they will set out the requirements for that in the scope. And the contractor will in turn provide that commercial information and pricing information in the pricing information document, which is referred to in Contract Data Part 2 when you use secondary option X22. So the scope sets out a bit about how the contractor is to provide pricing information, and also the submissions procedure for their proposals in stage 2. And the scope will also contain an explanation of stages 1 and 2 from the client's perspective for this specific project. So it's likely that there will be a section in the scope which deals specifically with the requirements for ECI when you select option X22. And aside from the commercial information and pricing information, the client will also need to request information about the quality capabilities, the technical capabilities, and importantly, the behavioral maturity of the bidders in order to properly assess the best partner, if you like, or best contractor to work with on a two-stage arrangement. And I believe, I'd like to say, I think when you use ECI, these aspects around the technical, the quality, and the behaviour are probably more important to get right than the commercial ingredients at this stage, because to get the right partner working with you during stage 1, developing those designs, finding the optimum solutions makes a huge difference to the outcome of the project. Having said that, it's still preferential to try to fix as much pricing ingredients and pricing rules as possible at the outset. And there are actually quite a wide range of commercial ingredients, rates and prices that the client can request. For example, there are some things that the contract will require the contractor to be provided under option C for it to operate, such as the fee percentage that is normally provided in Contract Data Part 2 or tendered, and rates that are required for the schedules or cost components in Contract Data Part 2. For example, equipment rates, design rates for designers working outside the working areas. But there are other things that the client can request the contractor to provide that might be really interesting or helpful, and will help come up with a robust method of pricing the total of the prices in stage 1. So as a result of the bid process, the contractor will also be required to submit proposals for how they will build up the target price, and they will provide that information, and it will go into the pricing information. And that will involve not just the tendered rates and commercials, but the other sources of information and pricing methods available to contractors during that stage 1. Other things that the contractor will be required to provide at the bid stage, and importantly, key people for the stage 1 process is a necessary submission and really helpful for the client to evaluate the best value bidder. And in addition to that, the sort of things that clients could ask and would be valuable to clients, details of the contractor's design strategy, their supply chain strategy, their ideas on bringing modern methods, innovation and efficiency to the project and design, how they plan to reduce risk and manage risk or identify risk during stage one. And I think it would be sensible for the client to consider conducting interviews or workshops to assess behaviours of the proposed key people during the bid process, so they can really evaluate the right fit behaviourally for the contractor they want to work with. All of these items are key to determine the likely success of the project. In terms of how could a contractor go about winning a job that they're bidding on an ECI basis, contractors should focus on providing the best key people they can with the most collaborative approach, the positive mindset, and with experience and track record of developing innovative and efficient design, and could talk the client through how they plan to develop the program and their pricing proposals for the optimum scheme possible. Okay, so I've mentioned, I think the most important selection criteria is to select a contractor with a collaborative approach and understanding client needs. And the client will need to decide the weighting to be placed upon the various bid ingredients that they request, how much emphasis to place on the commercial ingredients, how much emphasis to play on the technical, quality and behavioural. And as I said previously, I think typically clients will want to weight the ingredients more in favour of quality, technical and behavioural for an ECI. The commercial ingredients, to evaluate those, it's also possible for the client to build a financial model that replicates their budget, and to put the various commercial ingredients into that financial model to assess which contractor is providing the commercial ingredients that provide the best value for this particular project. So there's a quick run through for how the bid could be set up and how contractors, the information contractors can provide and how clients could evaluate those. But Peter, how would you go about bringing all that together into a contract?
Yeah, well, it's important to include the right information in the contract, but also include in the right place. There's a lot of data that's going to come in at tender, and it's going to be used in various different ways. Some of it will go in the contract, some of it will not. So starting up, what do you include in the contract and where do you put it? Well, we've talked about pricing information. Matthew's gone on about that, and we'll get a little more information about that shortly. There's two parts to the pricing information, quite critically. First part is what I call the financial bit, the money bit, the bit that is a commitment by the contractor in terms of numbers, the financial things which are going to be binding on the contractor. The contractor is stuck with those numbers. The contractor can't charge a different amount because that's the figure that was agreed and fixed in the contract. But we only use those binding numbers. Do not use something which has been used in a tender assessment, perhaps, but doesn't form part of a commitment from the contractor. So if you've got a forecast of resource usage, for example, that may be something that you've asked for and you've used, and you say, well, that's good. It helps me to understand things, and I've also used it as part of my assessment, and it's scored well. But the contractor hasn't committed to that financial forecast, and therefore it shouldn't form part of your pricing information financial side. The second part of the pricing information, which is equally important, if not more so, is what I would call the procedure for getting to the price for stage two. You need to know within pricing information how you're going to use the various data you've got and the data you haven't got in order to get to a clear price. Now, the client will need to set out that criteria, how the client wants the information to be used to get to a total, and therefore ask the supplier, the contractor, to bid on that basis, providing the information. These are broadly going to be the principles and the rules to be applied for identifying cost, including the sources of cost, and of course how subcontractors are going to be appointed and the pricing of subcontracted work. And then clearly at the tender stage, you need to check that that material has been provided and it's realistic and it's something you can understand and rely on. The second part of inclusion, what we need to include is the scope. Now, clearly, the client set out the scope in the first place, and that's gone out to the suppliers when they're pricing the job, and the scope could be amended during the tender period. So it's got to be an amalgam of the client's initial scope plus anything that's been amended during the tender stage. But this isn't going to be a detailed scope as to how the work's going to be built. It's more of a sort of embryonic design and build type scope. This is what I want, and this I want you to comply with. So there's a whole gamut of arrangements in the scope, and this is the client side of scope. Now, the other part is what we call the scope provided the contractor for its design, where the contractor is making proposals, technical proposals, which effectively are part of the design of this contract. They need to be included in the contractor's scope. And the key point about that is that if you include material in the contractor's scope, which is the contractor's commitment to do things in a certain way, then the contractor is obliged to do it that way. It's binding on the contractor. The contractor can't change it. The contractor can change anything else it likes, but it can't change things which are within its scope for the design. That can only be changed if the project manager agrees and the project manager instructs the change. So that's quite a fundamental point to bear in mind. Things which you want to be binding on the contractor, but are not financial parts, are not part of the pricing information, you need to include in the scope provided by the contractor for its design. Now, having looked at the documents there, these are the documents you need to include in your contract, which will be the formal document that governs the relationship between the client and the contractor. But from that, once we've got the contract documents, we need to work out how we're going to use them. And the first part is in stage one. So again, we go back to Matthew to explain how we're going to use these documents that we've now got to use them in developing the prices and developing the design and going forward in stage one.
Thanks, Peter. And as we've said previously, the type of commercial data that is requested at the bid stage, the prices, rates, or commercial criteria that is requested are absolutely key to working up the total of the prices in stage one for stage two. And also the procedures or the detailed proposals that the contractor has provided in its tendered pricing information on how it intends to take the client on that journey through building up a price in stage one for stage two. I'm going to have a look now at some of the commercial criteria that the client can request or should request. There's some things the contractor has to provide, as we said earlier, fee rates and things, and there's a variety of other things that the client can ask for. And these, I'm going to try and explore how these play out to help the parties through that journey of providing a robust total of the prices during stage one. And I'd like to ask the audience, as we're going through some of these requesting or fixing some of these commercial ingredients at an early stage, some of them carry real pros and cons. For example, if the more of the pricing ingredients you fix down, I guess the less flexibility there is later on in stage one as you develop the scheme. So you could run into a scenario where you want to make fundamental changes to the design or the program, and the fixity of the pricing arrangement stops you or makes it difficult to do that. So I'm gonna have a go at sharing my screen, which is a technical challenge in itself, and go on to some slides. And as I'm going through those, I'd just like to invite anybody in the chat to put up questions or their thoughts on the pros and cons of some of these things being fixed at the outset. So I'm kind of hoping you can see my screen now. So the pricing ingredients that are actually required, as I said, the fee percentage is needed by the conditions of contract to operate the payment mechanisms for any option C contract. And likewise, rates required by the schedule of cost components for equipment, manufacturing, fabrication, design outside working areas. These are all really helpful for the building up of a price in stage one for the total of the prices. But then we get on to things that are optional and things that I've seen from experience that clients have asked for. So I think a really straightforward one that works quite well is, an unquantified schedule of rates for expected work items. There's usually a very good idea of the certain type of works that are going to be needed. And certainly if the design does change or develops, it's very easy to pro rata. For example, if you've got a rate for a certain width of steel reinforcement, if other widths are needed, it's quite easy to pro rata or adapt a rate. So a really well thought through unquantified schedule of rates. Again, at the tender stage, the client can put those into the budget model to model which bidder has come up with the best value solution for the project. That works really well. I don't think there's much controversial about that. This is an interesting one. People rates can be provided, or maximum people rates, even though engineering construction contract option C, provides for defined cost of people during stage 2. Certainly rates could be built up, or maximum rates could be used for the building up of the total of the prices in stage 1. And those could be the subject of bid submission. So client can model those again against the competitors. This was an interesting one I've seen, that the client could request that the contractor provides a maximum cost of a management team as a percentage of the total of the prices. So that's a really interesting one. So a contractor is going to have to assess, the likely size or proportion of its management team, and that could be used as a maximum. Could that be pros and cons of that one, do you think? And then you get into some really tricky areas. So risk is always very tricky to assess, and it always be subjective between contractor and client as to who holds the risk. Normally has a stronger view of how much is needed to be allowed for it. But I've seen this done where maximum risk allowances per specific items, or even a percentage risk allowance as a percentage of defined cost or percentage of the total of the prices for key risks. Really interesting. A little bit of foresight needed from the contractor to do that, but I think this is one that could carry pros and cons. And linked to that, maybe even a maximum overall risk allowance for the contractor's risks could be the subject of a tender, either as an amount or a percentage. Again, a percentage of defined cost or percentage of total prices. And there's another one that's really interesting. Could the contractor provide a cost or a maximum cost of design for stage 1? Probably the most tricky out of the ones I've put up there, but it's a thought-provoking question. And the idea of bringing some of these things in is to lock down as much as possible the robustness of the pricing process for stage 1 to build a total of the prices. So I'd like to ask the audience, do you see specific problems in some of these? Which do you think work really well? Which do you think there could be pros and cons? And what are those pros and cons that you see in these items? I'm going to come back onto online now.
I've got a question here, one from Simon Broadhurst, who's raised a point, and he's saying, well, fine, that's all very well with these things. 6 or 12 months ago, that's fine, no problem. But with the current volatility in material and fuel costs, are so great. So are any rates any great value, or how do we index links them? How do we deal with it? The fact that any rate you give now is going to be quite different in a few months' time, or very different from what it was 12 months ago.
Yeah, I think that, getting a bit feedback there. I think it's a very good point. Of course, you can use secondary option X1 indexation, but I think there is, real volatility in the market. If there is real volatility in the market, that could cause a problem. But that will cause a problem with the budget. It will cause a problem with any approach to trying to price a project through ECI. And I think the client, it's something I haven't got the answer to specifically, but it's something the client and contractor will have to consider in deciding which of these can be meaningfully fixed and which ones can't. The good thing about ECI is that potentially, as you go through the design development phase and get the design to a more advanced stage, you could be going out for supply chain prices in the to help you build up the total of the prices in real time and capture much more robust pricing basis in that way. And in that sense, that would probably be preferable than trying to fix a lot of rates and prices early on at the bid stage if you have got a situation where there's a lot of volatility in the market.
Okay, just a bit of clarification here. Eric Stevens is asking for advice on how does the fee percentage and the rates differ? How do we deal with that?
Sorry, the rates, yes, a good question. So when I'm talking about fee percentage, I'm talking about the fee that gets added to the defined cost or the forecast defined cost when you're building up the total of the prices. The rates I'm talking about are actually cost rates. So you'll be looking at cost rates for things. So the cost rates don't include the fee. The fee typically is the part of the contractor's pricing that includes their overhead and profit and any other costs that aren't paid for as defined cost. I hope that answers that one.
Okay. Is there a clause in the contract that helps to deal with price volatility?
There is a clause that helps deal with price volatility, and that, of course, is secondary option X1, which is an indexation approach to adjustment of the prices on using industry standard published indices normally. And the reason I say I think it helps is because those indices can be hit and miss, or they can, depending on the choice of index, it depends whether it accurately reflects the inflation you're seeing on the specific subject matter that you're procuring. So I think it helps, but I don't think it is a complete solution when there is really an awful lot of volatility. Okay.
Well, there's a couple of other questions which are fairly general ones. I think we'll take those a little bit later if you want to continue with the...
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so looking now at how the contractor will work with the client and the project manager to develop the proposals for stage 2, including the total of the prices. So there are a few things I've noted down that I think are key to the success of stage 1 that I'll just quickly run through. One is the contractor must bring an approach of transparency, working open book, and real team working with the client team. In practice, the client often employs a cost consultant to carry out the cost verification, cost assurance, cost validation purposes. There's an awful lot of work, as you could imagine, building up the prices in stage 1 from a variety of sources. And it really helps if there is some expertise in the room from the client side, working really closely with the contractor and the project manager. There should be regular discussion, team working and submissions on the forecast project costs throughout stage 1. The contractor should welcome the client team into the project team, helping them understand all aspects of pricing and forecasting. Experience tells us that face-to-face works a lot better in this environment than contractors submitting their latest forecast cost or forecast project cost to the client team, sitting around, being able to interact, ask questions, go and find out the answer in real time. Sitting together and working through it to each understand the whole thing is a really good way forward. The contractor will probably have a system, a digital system, which it will be using to build up the total of the prices or the forecast cost. And, for example, an estimating system or other commercial system. And the contractor should really help the client team understand how to use that, give them access, give them licenses, train them, so that everybody's looking at the data as it evolves and can have access and feel comfortable. Other lessons learned from experience, the earlier the contractor is involved in the design process, the more potential there is for innovation and efficiency ideas to be introduced. It's quite a good idea to engage strategic suppliers into the process, bring them into the process and get their benefit of providing pricing information, recent cost information, costs from other projects, helping build up that total of the prices based on their solutions. One thing that is clear from looking over many complex projects, and clients won't always have the time for this, but if you can develop the design to a high level of maturity and detail during this stage one, prior to construction starting, with the benefit of the contractor's input, the supply chain's input, with key risks having been really looked at and mitigated. If you get that design to a very high level of maturity before you start constructing, it produces much better outcomes. In other words, you have a much more robust price and program. We very often nowadays see contractors designing and constructing in parallel. And it's the benefit of ECIs, if you've got the time, you could really do an excellent job getting a very robust design, price and program during stage one if you put your mind to it. So how do you build up the total of the prices for stage two? Well, it actually varies through the life of the design, actually. If the design is at an early stage, the estimating will need to be quite high level. You might be able to get some approximate quantities, but you'll be looking at, outturn of previous projects, benchmarking, getting, basically you're pricing on a much more approximate high level basis. As the design develops, the estimate can become more granular and detailed. You can now use rates, prices, and supply chain quotations to price actual measures. You get the strategic supply chain employed by getting them to properly price aspects of the work, and you can plan with a great deal more certainty as well. So let's have a look at the different methods that can be used to build the total of the prices in stage two, and I'm going to do some more slides. Okay, so how to build the total of the prices. Pricing methods can include I'll just go back in that. That didn't quite work. So pricing methods in stage one can include, of course, the rates that have been provided at the tender stage, as we discussed earlier, and can be used and adapted to suit a range of situations, provide a really good source of pricing information. And I mentioned before, rates and prices taken from previous projects is a common way of getting real cost data into the pricing process. As I mentioned there, by engaging with the supply chain or even going out for either friendly cost advice, budget advice, or actually firm prices from the supply chain can be used depending on the maturity of the design. Benchmarking costs from previous projects, either for part of the works or the whole of the works, is absolutely see that being done on ECI approaches a lot of the time. It's a good way of actually checking if you've done a lot of detailed work. It's a good way of checking back that you're in the right place or roughly in the right place. We talked about cost volatility and certainly inflation assessments as appropriate, looking at the right index. I mean, for example, the BCIS publishes civil engineering works indices. They not only tell you what has happened retrospectively, but they give you a forecast for the future. It's not concrete, to say the least, but it gives you an indication. And as we mentioned before, the assessment of risk. The assessment of risk is always tricky because it's quite subjective. As I say here in the words in italics, it's a key aspect that requires some attention. It's often an area that contractor and clients sometimes have different perspectives, and it really helps if maybe the contractor and client work together to agree an appropriate risk model that can be used to assess the risk contingency. At least if we can agree an approach and a method of assessing risk, and maybe even sometimes if there's different perspectives and there are things we're getting stuck on, maybe bring in some sort of independence from our businesses that will see if they can help us get our views more aligned on risk. But it is an area that is actually quite tricky. Coming back out of the presenting. So in conclusion, another thing I would say about risk is it's not uncommon that a client and contractor might get to a point in stage one where they think the most appropriate way is to allocate a specific risk in a different way than the contract allocates it for the benefit of the project. For example, if a client is really keen to get the job within a certain budget and they agree that there's a certain risk that's taking because of the level of uncertainty, it's making it difficult to agree to the prices under that budget. They may agree that the client could agree to take that additional risk, and that could be done either by inserting an additional compensation event into contract data, or maybe even a contract amendment to put that risk allocation into effect. So that's something I've seen done before in getting to that closing stages of ECI. So Peter, moving on to stage two.
Yes. Okay, stage two. You've gone through this process of developing the design, developing the construction methodology, developing the prices. Do we move to stage two? Have we got there? Number of things need to be met. Number of criteria have to be achieved before you can get to stage two. Firstly, as the obvious one, all necessary approvals, consents from third parties, others need to be achieved. So planning consents or approvals by those who are authorised to give it, railway company or highway company, whatever. They've all been achieved. So we've got the approvals, but there's no third party going to obstruct. The design proposals need to be accepted, obviously. You're not going to go forward if you haven't decided what you want to build. That doesn't mean the design's complete. The contractor can then appointed to do the design work, detailed design, as part of the stage two work. But you do need to know what is going to be built in sufficient confidence that it achieves client objectives and it can be priced by the contractor. Now, during the submissions procedure, most of that will have been agreed. So there shouldn't be very much to concern yourselves with at that stage, at deciding there. You've agreed it all at the submission stage, so it's the whole package again. I'll be happy with it. The budget must be finalised, and it must be sufficient. Now, there's a slightly complex position we've got here. If the budget isn't, there's a few categories when the budget can be changed. Basically, if the client decides he wants to do something different from what we initially told the contractor was wanted, and that could become quite substantial or even quite minor, but that could lead to a budget change because the contractor priced on what the client said they wanted, and if they now say they want something different from that, that's not design development, that's saying change your mind, Mr. Contractor, you cannot do that, you must do this instead. That results in a change to the budget. Generally, the budget discussion will then take place between project manager and contractor to seek to agree it. If they can't agree, the project manager is authorised to make a determination after discussing it with the client. Now, that's a bit of a a nuclear reaction, because if you think about it, the contractor is now in a position where they haven't been able to agree the budget. The budget's been imposed at a figure which the contractor thinks is inadequate. It does rather change the motivation of the contractor in terms of trying to achieve client objectives when the contractor no longer thinks the budget can be achieved. So be cautious on that one. Now, the prices need to be agreed for stage 2. And different from the budget, they must be agreed. If the contractor and the project manager can't agree them, then you don't go to stage 2, full stop. So there's a bit of a pressure point here. The contractor's pressured to agree something because they want to build stage 2. The project manager is pressured to agree something with the contractor because they want the job to go ahead, and it'll be disruptive if it's not. So there's a bit of pressure on both sides to come to a sensible agreement over prices, using the information that Matthew has explained is there for the assessment of those prices. Now, the programme also needs to be agreed. The programme will be built up as one goes along. It'll be working out how we're going to do things and what sequence things are done in, when we need to get access to places to do it, and so on. So again, a lot of the information in the programme will be there. There's a bit of fine tuning at the end, and you will have a programme which gives the starting date, the access dates, completion date, whatever, all tied up in the programme. Then the final step is the client needs to confirm he wants to go ahead. This is basically down for a governance process. Client gets everything together and says it needs to get authorization from the board or from Secretary of State or whoever it may be to go and commit to spend this money doing this particular project. Timing of that's quite important because the programme will show when the work's going to start on site, when access is needed to start the work, and approval to go ahead, commitment to proceed needs to be given in sufficient time to meet that deadline. If not, then the programme starts to unravel, and then the prices start to unravel because they're all linked together. Now, there can be you can have any reason at all for withholding, and it's usually just funding issues. We've decided that we don't have enough funds to do it. The price that we know the budget has been as fixed, but it's really too much. We don't want to go down that far, so they pull out of it. Or it could be a lack of confidence in the contractor, confidence in the performance of the contractor, the performance measures that we've achieved, or confidence in the way that the debate over the budget's gone, or whatever it may be. There could be just a lack of confidence. I'm not going to go ahead anymore. Now, if you don't move to stage 2, question mark is, what do I do now? Can I appoint a new contractor? Well, in certain circumstances, yes. If the prices aren't agreed, or if the programme can't be agreed, then you can appoint a new contractor, go out to tender, obtain prices for this completed design or design stage, and appoint a contractor under that new contract. If the contractor fails to achieve certain performance requirements, you can go out to another contractor and get the work done. But you need to be cautious. It's not just any old performance requirements. You need to be identifying the particular performance requirements that will entitle the client to say, no, I'm not appointing you, I'm going out to another contractor. So very specially identified requirements. So yes, this is the step to go to stage 2, which everybody wants to go to, but there are certain times when you don't go there, and if you don't go there, you can appoint a new contractor under certain circumstances. The idea being, of course, that you don't just pull out for any old reason, no reason at all, and go and appoint a new contractor. It needs to be some reason, because you've got a commitment there, or the original contractor to go through to stage 2, unless certain things happen. We're going to move to your questions, but before they're doing that, can I just flag up, we've got a user group conference on June 16th. You'll be getting a bit more reminder about it, but put that in your diary. There's a lot more information coming out about how we can deal with NEC under feedback we get from other contracts and from workshops that we're going to have on that one. So it'll be a useful day out. We can either have it in presence up in London, or you can log in online and join the same session. So look at that one, June 16th, keep it in your diaries. Okay, over to questions then. We've got some questions coming, Matthew. You picked anything up?
Oops, there are a couple of Peter. Back again. There are a couple of questions coming through. I'm just going to add actually to what you've just said about the decision of moving to stage 2 or not. from the contractor's point of view, that jeopardy of not moving to stage 2 is an important piece of commercial tension, actually. It means, because from a contractor's viewpoint, we really want to get on and do the job. Okay, we don't want to miss out, or we don't want to introduce unnecessary delays. So more often than not, the contractor is trying really hard at this point to try and get the job within the budget and trying all things possible. And even if all the efforts that have preceded during stage 1 haven't got you there, there's still that commercial tension at the final closing stages. I think it's a really important part of how ECI works. I thought I'd just buy some time there and get some questions coming through. So what we've got here, why is X22 not standard in other options? So, for example, why don't we recommend using it with option A? I think that's a good one for you, Peter.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. It's a question we keep getting asked. Last time was a seminar we did down in South Africa by I was being challenged on that one. The point is that we've designed the whole of the X22 is designed so that the contractor and the client are working together to achieve client objectives. And that requires a number of things to work together. Now, you could have some kind of early contractor involvement using an option A contract, but X20, our clause that's drafted, doesn't actually work that well, because it doesn't have the things which are there to constrain and control how that relationship will work. The relationship's meant to be collaborative, working together, sharing in the benefits of getting there. As soon as you move to an option A contract, that sharing of benefits disappears. So now the contractor is motivated with a different approach to looking after how stage 1 is dealt with, because they're looking over the shoulder at stage 2. How do I make sure that I make my money out of stage 2 regardless? And therefore the motivation is different. So you do need to think about how you're going to bring an option A in contract in. Do not assume that you can use the X16X clause and simply cause it not option A contract. You're asking for trouble. You just need to redesign the thing and make sure that you've got the right controls and constraints built in. It's not something that we've encouraged, because we think that the right way to deal with it is to get a collaborative way of working right the way through, so that the whole of the risk management process through stage 1 and stage 2 is jointly managed, rather than simply saying, now it's option A, it's over to you, Mr. Contractor, and a different approach applies. So it was the philosophy we developed when we initially started, and that was the way that the whole of the optional clause was designed.
We've got more questions coming through, Peter. I'll have to pick them out by exception and see how we go. Someone has asked, what is the difference between NEC4 option X22 and other collaborative forms such as the alliance contract? Something you'd like to pick out, or I'm happy to have a go?
Well, I think you have a go at this one, Matthew. I've got another question for you coming up in a moment. I've just spotted. So yeah, you try that one while I work on this next one.
Yeah, and if I pick the alliance contract, it's a very different way of procuring collaboratively, in the sense that it's a multi-party contract where there is a group of participants coming together under a single contract. So that is a very different way. The NEC4 X22 is still working on a bilateral contract between the client and the contractor, which is very different to the alliance contract. So there's different ways of getting projects built collaboratively and with, early inputs from different providers. But ECI works with, the ECI X22 works with the engineering and construction contract, which is a bilateral contract. The alliance contract is another way of going about it, where you get a group of participants into an alliance contract working together to deliver the outcome of usually a large or complex project or program. So I think each of the items that was mentioned in that question are actually different and serve slightly different purposes or have slightly different benefits.
Yeah.
We've got one here. Let's try now. If the stage 1 contractor does not move to stage 2, and stage 2 is then goes out to tender, who owns the design responsibility for design produced during stage 1?
Well, the client owns it as far as the new contractor is concerned. And if there's a defect in the design, then they may well feel that they've got some remedy against the contractor who gave them that design, but it's the client's responsibility in the new contract.
Okay, and a similar theme actually, Peter. If you can't move to stage 2 due to various reasons, is the contractor contractually compensated for this?
No. The idea is that the contractor is compensated fully for the work they've done. There's a risk that they will not go to stage 2. The contractor is not compensated if they don't go to stage 2 any more than the client is compensated if the contractor is unable to agree a price for stage 2. It's just the way that the contract is designed. There's no failure. There's no neither side has actually failed to do what they should have done in the contract, and therefore should have compensation. So it's just a matter of it sits where it lies. The contractor takes a risk that they will do stage 1 and not get stage 2 because stage 2 doesn't go ahead. That's part of life. Mm-hmm. I've got one for you here, Matthew. Just on here. One from John Broom. He's saying, how does the client specify the bones of how the price is to be worked out? Your pricing model, when the pricing information is exclusively supplied by the contractor.
Yeah. Okay. So the choice of the commercial ingredients and the way the contractor will use those to build up a price can be set out in the scope, and the scope therefore can determine what the contractor specifies what the contractor is going to provide in his pricing information and how it is applied. It is useful then for the pricing information, the client to maybe provide a template pricing information that gives the contractor the fields it needs to fill in, and it will match up very closely, obviously, with what the scope has said is not only the commercial ingredients they're going to be asked for during the bid, but how they are to be applied during the stage 1 works. Then that pricing information is provided by the contractor in the pricing information, and the contractor then also provides more detailed proposals in the pricing information on how it will also help and how it sees the total of the prices being built up in stage 1. I hope that helps.
Good. Now there's a tricky one for you here, Matthew. How do we get contractors into that open book free information access mindset? There seems to be a struggle as it's an overall change in how relationships have worked in the past.
It is a mindset change, Peter, and it is a mindset change, and there are huge benefits that come from being open, being a little bit more vulnerable, the sharing of your own problems sometimes. Often there's 2 minds are better than one that help solve them. It's a learning curve, and I think clients need to be really careful when they're selecting the contractor during the bid stage, that the contractor has got that mindset or has got people in their team who can help the others form that mindset. Hence why I say the behavioural assessment is really key, because if you get a contractor that simply can't or won't adopt that mindset, the ECI simply won't work.
Okay, there's one I picked up, which is one I'll deal with, and you can look at the next question then, Matthew. What level of detail should be provided by the client within the scope as an ECI at tender stage? So do you go as far as to specify colour of something? And if you don't, can you then change your mind and specify a colour? Is that a change in some way, or does that give rise to some form of compensation, or is that just design development? Well, I think I mentioned this. There's a thing in the contract called client requirements. And these are the things that the client specifies that says these things must be provided. The contractor must do these things. And if colour is important, that will be a client requirement. If colour is not mentioned as a client requirement, then it's obviously the colour is not that important. Maybe the client's put something in there that says that the colour must be commensurate with this and it must be that, and I need to be comfortable with the colour or whatever. But if there's absolutely no sound mention whatsoever of something, then it's not a client requirement. And if you want to introduce it, then it becomes a client requirement, and that generates a change in the budget. So changing the paint colour might not be much of a change in the budget, but the concept is there. So there's this approach that says if there's something important to the client that must be developed in this contract, you need to specify it in some way within the scope. Because if it's not, then it would trigger a change to this budget if you do later decide you want to make that, implement that particular requirement.
Okay, Peter, I'll put on here as well. Bit of feedback there. So someone's asked, what about using ECI on an engineering construction subcontract? And currently we don't provide that this option in the subcontracts. And the reason I picked this one out is I've had more than one colleague say to me, Peter, that it would be useful to have option X22 in a subcontract, and particularly getting strategic subcontractors on board with the process in a more of an aligned way rather than employing them on a professional services contract. So I think we won't answer that now, but I think I'll put that one into the box for the future NEC discussions, Peter, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, very happy. We did actually look at this a little while ago and wondered whether we should have been doing something on that, but we came to the conclusion actually it's quite tricky to get the thing to mesh with the main contract ECI meshing well with a subcontract ECI, but it's something that should be looked at. I agree with you.
And there's one here that's quite a useful suggestion. Someone is saying they think it's important to, throughout stage one, define the activities that will take place. For example, key milestones, interfaces, consents, almost like a program of works or program of key milestones, providing key information so that there can be a progressive assurance that stage one is heading in the right direction. I think is a good suggestion.
Yeah.
I'll just pick some questions here by random. How do you promote competitiveness as NE4, as it is a bilateral contract? Should you have an ace up your sleeve, meaning another contractor awaiting if the main contractor continues with the project or not? Peter, representing more the client side, I'll ask you that one.
Yeah, no, you can't. What contractor wants to sit around just in case they might get a job? And once you've reached the stage where you go to the second contractor and said, well, we can't agree with the first one, so I'd like you to do it. Let's talk about the price now. You're in a hiding to nothing. But we did try one time with one client and saying, well, as part of the submission procedure, you need to provide me, Mr. Contractor, you need to provide me with the complete set of tender documents so that I can go out to immediate contract tender the day I decide I'm not going to go with you. Use that as a bit of a lever, but you've got to work on a relationship thing. You can't have a little hammer behind your back and saying, well, if you don't behave, I'll hit you with this, and then expect a collaborative, cooperative, a good working relationship. Work on the relationship rather than on the tools to damage it.
That's a very nice quote.
We're a couple of minutes left. We can give the other one or two questions if you like.
One here. Do you commonly see X20 KPIs as well as pain gain approach? I mean,
yeah, there's no reason why not.
Yeah, absolutely. We do often see KPIs now that are, clients have more than one objective. It's not just price program normally. There are many things that clients now want to see, the impact on society, the planet, local relationships with local boroughs. There are lots of things that the client wants to see the contractor achieve and prepare to reward them for it other than price and program. So yeah, we do see increasing use of X20 alongside pain gain.
Okay. Question there about budget. I think probably maybe the last one, I'm not sure. There's a question here that says, when you're assessing a budget incentive, why do you not update the budget for compensation events? Well, the two different things. A compensation event would affect the target, which is the target share if you've got a target contract. If you've got a cost reimbursement contract without a target, then obviously it has no real impact on the price at all. But the difference is that the budget is only updated for certain specific changes. So you could end up with a budget being just about hit or just missed, and yet having adjusted the target to something which actually caused that budget to be overstated. So it's a problem that you've got, that you need to recognise that there are two different things. And one of the important points to bear this in mind is what I term conflicting motivators. If you've got a budget incentive and a target incentive, make sure that you've got the contract lined up well. There was an awful case some years ago of a client who had to go back to the Secretary of State and ask for some more money because they've overspent the budget. And the Secretary of State was, why did you overspend the budget? What went wrong? He said, well, we were not too bad, but we had to pay the contractor a bonus for beating the target. You can imagine that went down very well in terms of relationship with that client to the Secretary of State. Okay, I think we just need to close there. It's 4 o'clock. What we'll try and do is we'll collect together a number of these questions that's been raised, things that we haven't been able to deal with today, and see whether we can't just put out a paper which is summarising some responses to those, just to help to pick up the questions that we've not been able to cover this afternoon. Happy with that, Matthew?
Yeah, very happy.
Okay, well, look, closing now. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks very much for the questions. They were very stimulating. I hope you found this useful. There's a guidance, as we say, on the website. So go and look at that one and join us at the annual conference on the 16th of June. Thank you very much and goodbye.